The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our September 2018 Expertise in Business webinar series. I'm Eric Hobbs, President of Technology Associates, and I'll be your moderator for today. So real quick, shameless plug here, Technology Associates, who we are. We're a technology solutions provider based in Cary, North Carolina. We leverage a proprietary process we call Insight to help businesses across the state with between 20 and 200 employees solve real-world business issues, increase their productivity, eliminate hidden risks, and reduce their overall IT support costs. So if you'd like to learn more, happy to set up a time to chat. So into the shameless plug. So today our topic is the patient organization leading with clarity and building loyalty in your company. And I'm honored to have Walt Brown with me. So Walt is based here in Raleigh, and his company, Walt Brown Co., helps clients focus on doing the simple things savagely well by working with leadership teams to create healthy and effective organizations. Walt's a seasoned multi-company entrepreneur who is 7 for 7 for launching and growing companies. During the last decade, he's helped transform the culture of more than 135 organizations across the country through patience and best practices exercised using the EOS methodology. To date, Walt has graduated 111 companies from the EOS program with 24 active clients on their way to mastery and graduation, of which we, Technology Associates, are one. So he is also the author of The Patient Organization, published by Forbes Books, and that's really what we're going to focus on here today. So first, some quick housekeeping. Enter any questions you have in the chat box, and I will gather those up and forward them to Walt. Our next webinar is going to be entitled Cyber Fortress, How to Protect Your Data Empire, and that will be on Tuesday, October the 16th, with our disaster recovery partner, Datto. You can go to our website /webinars for more information on that, and I'll post a join link in the chat box here in just a second. So with that, without further ado, Walt, take it away.
Bill, thank you, Eric. And as Eric said, he is one of our great clients. So I want to, he gave me a little introduction, but I would like to sort of set it up so we can understand what I'm talking about today, where it comes from, kind of describe the lifetime laboratory and the crucible through which we're going to be talking about today came from. I came out of school as an accounting and statistics nerd and worked for Ernst & Winnie, which is now called E&Y, for 4 audit seasons. And in 1986, I took the IQ exam, and I scored low enough, and I was allowed to start my own company. And I grew that company to 4 companies over 20 years and got lucky and sold them in 2006 to a family office, and was encouraged by my peers to hang my shingle as a executive coach. And I worked one-on-one with 33 CEOs for a few years, and then this thing called the Entrepreneurial Operating System discovered me, which is an organizational operating system. And for the last 10 years, I've been focused on as a full-time implementer of the EOS system, and numbers have changed a little bit, Eric, but graduated 138 clients from the program, currently carry around 27 clients, and that adds up to a little over 1,583 days in the room with senior leadership teams. So a lot of time crushing all this stuff we're looking at today. So what I want to do is start off by sharing 3 discoveries with you guys. Discovery number 1, your organization is a fiction, only given meaning and power by those who buy in and those who belong. If you have 200 people in your organization and 99 of them buy into this and 101 buy into that, then you have 2 organizations and you've already been divided and you're on your way to being conquered. That's discovery number 1.
And Walt, I'm sorry, I am behind on slides. Sorry, buddy.
Okay, awesome.
All right, we'll have it again.
we're good. This is discovery number 2. Started 6 years ago, and it's the 7 questions I'm going to share with you in just a minute. And the story starts like this: the problem with millennials. Now you can finish that sentence any way you wish, and odds are favorable. I've heard whatever you come up with, and I don't buy it. As a matter of fact, I don't even refer to these people, these millennials any longer. I refer to them using a symbol, kind of like the artist formerly known as Prince. Well, not really. I refer to them as our fresh workers and our fresh thinkers. And 6 years ago, I looked around and I found I was surrounded by these fresh thinkers who were not only engaged and motivated, but were ready to take over the world. And what I did is I asked my clients for permission to engage with these thinkers to see if we could discover what we were doing together that was breaking this mold and destroying this stereotype. And what we discovered was this, is that their companies had focused on one thing down two parallel paths. On one path, their senior leadership had done the hard work to attain what yes looks like to 7 fundamental questions. And on the parallel path, their company had done the hard work to install an organizational operating system that allowed every individual in the company to align to and then maintain yes to these 7 fundamental questions. And these were the questions they were able to say yes to. They were able to say, yes, I belong. Yes, I believe. Yes, I understand and embrace what I'm accountable for. I understand and embrace how I'm measured. I understand and embrace how I'm heard. I understand and embrace how I'm developed. And I understand and embrace how my organization helps me maintain balance. And when you can get to this point where you've discovered and have attained what yes looks like from the perspective of leadership, and then you've installed an organizational operating system that allows the individual to align to and maintain yes, then we can do something very powerful. And what we can do is we can make a promise to your organization where you say, everyone, every day I'm making a promise to you that I'm going to surround you with people who can say yes to these 7 things. And when you can make that promise and then keep that promise, you get to discovery number 3, which is what I call you create a patient organization. And what I mean by patience is an organization that's full of moxie and grit and guts and discipline and wisdom, and especially courage. Courage to take time to slow down and think, and courage to simplify, focus, and say no. So my challenge to the world and for you guys listening today is to use the 7 questions to do 2 things. The first, understand whether you as a leadership team have attained what yes looks like. And then number 2, use the 7 questions to audit your organizational operating system to see if it has the chops to do what it takes to help individuals in your company align to and then maintain yes to the 7 questions. So that's my goal with you guys today, is I give enough awareness about what yes looks like from both the organizational side and the individual side that you can use it as a tool to challenge yourself and your team. Make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
All right. So here we go. By the way, I'm nervous. I'm not breathing really well. This comes from the story of my father. When I was running my company, I would sometimes be complaining about things, any kind of business owner, complain about people. And I would be complaining, he would be pretending to listen, and then he would smile and he would say, well, son, without people, it would be easy. And he's true. Without customers and employees and vendors, it would be easy in the world if all we had to do is push bits and bytes around, right, Eric?
That's right. It'd be easy.
So what I want to do here is I want to set up this message a little bit in the psychology of people and the psychology of humans, especially with regards to the way that it looks like when you think about your organization or your company as a tribe. And so when we look back on history, humans have always been part of tribes. Our safety, our well-being, everything has always been tied to tribes. And so deep down in all of us, there's this huge tribal awareness. And so I'm going to talk about tribes. I'm going to talk about engagement in tribes, and I'm going to set up the sort of context of fear and thinking as it relates to tribes, organizations, your company. So it goes back to number 1. Think of your organization as a fiction. that's only given meaning and power by those who believe and those who buy in. We need one singular organization. And then we jump into the next piece, talking a little bit about this word called engagement. And again, I'm going to relate two stories with you that will kind of give us an idea of what engagement feels like. The first story is a story about engagement that comes from 1678, and it involves Sir Christopher Wren, who was the really just well-known English architect who built St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And there's a story about him going to the stonemason pit, and he shows up with one stonemason and asks the mason, "What are you doing?" And the mason says, leaning over, staying on his stone, "I'm cutting these stones to this certain size and shape." He goes to another mason, "What are you doing?" This mason continues working and says, "I'm cutting these stones for a certain wage." He goes to a third mason, asks the mason the same question. This time the mason stands up, straightens himself, looks him in the eye and says, "I am helping Sir Christopher Wren build St. Paul's Cathedral." Totally different between the three folks. Second one is a real story back in the 70s, back when UCLA was winning all of their national championships. There was a reporter that ended up in the locker room early in the morning, and he ran into one of the janitors who was cleaning the locker room up, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And the janitor answers him, "I'm helping UCLA win a national championship." And I'll reflect back on this as we go through the day. More information, away from the stories into the data around engagement. Gallup, every 3 years, does this employee engagement survey where they go out across the country and they basically have this 12 questions that they ask, and they come back with these results. And this is what the results look like. So what this curve looks like is to the left is disengagement, in the center is engagement, up to the right is engaged. So 32% of the average American workforce is engaged. Now, this is where everything good happens, this is where all the profit happens, this is where all the great relationships with customers happen. 50% of the folks out there working are just neutrally engaged. They're not dragging their brakes, they're still delivering their work. If you look at this little analogy here, I have a train, so the little engines that could are the ones that are the engaged ones. And the neutrally engaged ones are the coal cars. They're still doing hard work, carrying heavy loads, chugging along down the track, but they're really not adding in any energy, but they're also not taking away a lot of energy. They're just neutrally engaged. And then you have this segment over here called the disengaged, and those are represented by cabooses or unfilled boxcars, but they're actually adding friction, and they're not on the track. Exactly, I got to bounce it around the track. 18%. So when you think about it, put in your mind someone you know that's engaged, and then put in your mind somebody you know in your organization that's disengaged. And what is the ratio with regards to offset? How many engaged people are offset by a single disengaged person?
I know it's got to be high.
Well, Gallup says it's 1-to-1. Most of my clients say, well, they think it's a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1. I had this one client named Mike, and Mike said, well, let's do this. You're the engaged one, Walt. You go around cleaning up the house. I'm the disengaged one. I'm going to go around messing up the house. Who's going to win? Pretty clear.
Yeah, he's going to win every single time.
He'll win every single time. Now, you're never going to totally, quote unquote, get rid of all of your disengaged folks, but the goal is to allow them to self-select out of the organization or actually to become engaged. And there's a couple things I want us to take away from this graph right here. And it's a pretty strong understanding that no matter what organization you have, you're always going to have around 50% of your folks are going to be neutrally engaged, especially as you grow. So don't worry about moving those people. Just keep them happy. They actually can answer yes to the 7 questions. It's just their yes might be, spelled with lowercase letters as opposed to capital case letters like the 32% engaged. So don't worry so much about that 50%. Pay more attention to the 18% and the 32%. So the next slide is a discovery that came from working with a bunch of my clients, and it's what I call the opportunity and danger gap. If you take this line that holds all three of these areas and you fold it together up at the top, what you recognize is there's actually a very small gap between disengagement and engagement, and that there's still a lot of distance between if you have to go across sort of neutral territory. And what we find, especially if you ask an engaged employee, that if something gets on their nerves or pisses them off, they can actually find themselves being fairly disruptive and kind of acting out disengagement pretty quickly. And I ask that question to folks, and they're like, yeah, you're right. If I'm not getting what I want, or I don't feel like I'm being heard, then I can actually become disengaged pretty quickly. The idea here is they're just, the disengaged folks are looking for something that maybe you haven't given them. And if you can give it to them and meet them there, then they're going to come over to your engaged side. They typically don't move through the neutral engagement area. They don't cross that desert. They just go across the gap back and forth. So we have to be careful that we can lose our engaged to disengagement. We have a pretty big opportunity to pull our disengaged over because they actually care about something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in reading the book, and I want to kind of maybe put it in my own terms, and this is something that from reading the book, I kind of sussed out. And that's really, you don't move from disengaged through neutral caring up to engaged. You're saying that you jump directly from disengaged to engaged, and the 7 questions really helps get people engaged or let them understand that this isn't the right spot for them and help the disengaged kind of bridge that gap, right? That's really where the tool is being used.
Yeah, bridge the gap or self-select out.
Yes. Yeah. Either jump over or get out. Yeah.
Or get out. Maybe fall through the gap and go off somewhere else, but they self-select out. Exactly. That's exactly what it is, Eric. Okay, so here we go. Jumping into this whole idea around fear and thinking. So remember, we're still in the context of a tribe, and there is an acronym here. Not an acronym, but what's that called when it's a word that's, oh well, whatever. This is a word that supports letters that are basically tribal triggers that trigger fear that make us not think so clearly. And the what's it called, Eric?
I think you're right. An acronym. Yeah, I think you're right.
An acronym. So
I vote for that.
It's SCARF. And so I use it as a verb where when you trigger any of these fear mechanisms, somebody becomes scarfed. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. So as you're part of a tribe, we have these like huge sensors going on of our status in the tribe, which informally it says status concerns our relative importance to others. And it's basically how we fit into the overall matrix. You know, the janitor and the mason absolutely were secure in what their status was. They knew why they were there and how they were helping. They were a brick in the wall. You pull the brick out, they knew the whole thing would fall down. So, you know, it's not a matter of up and down in terms of what your status is. It's just secure in terms of how you fit and you know that you fit. Clear?
Mm-hmm.
That's status. Certainty is the degree to which we can predict the future. Well, you know, the future is the idea of is my company on the right track? Do I have a job? Can I pay my bills? All that kind of future. And it's also, are you in alignment with where the organization is going into the future? You know, so the Mason knew he was building a grand cathedral and was wonderfully a part of that. And the janitor knew he was on the path to win a national championship. These are things where there's certainty in terms of direction of the organization. The more certain you are, the less fear there is. Autonomy is all about sense of control over our decisions and our work and our lives. But basically, it's really talking a lot about whether you're being micromanaged or not, or, you know, how much do you want to be managed, and is it the right amount, or do you want to be led or managed? You know, if you're being over micromanaged, then that might trigger your in autonomy, or if you aren't getting enough leadership, then it might trigger sort of a negative in autonomy. So there's a balance there. Is that clear?
Yep, crystal.
Sort of. Okay. And then the next one is relatedness. You know, how do you fit the group? Do you really belong? Do you laugh at the jokes? And we kind of boil this down into, do you have the core value alignment to the organization or not? Do you believe? Are you related to what the tribe is about, what the organization is about? And the F is fairness, which is interesting, where, you know, fairness is a perception of impartial, just treatment. So yes, from an individual basis, yes, are you being treated fairly in terms of opportunities you're given or how you're being compensated, but it's also from another perspective of if you're seeing somebody else in the tribe not being treated fairly, it can actually trigger this sort of negative fear response. So whether you're being scarfed or not, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. Cool?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this takes us to this next piece is how fear, being scarfed, hits our ability to think rationally. Now, this piece right here, System 1 thinking, System 2 thinking, comes from Dr. Daniel Kahneman, who is the author of Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And he was a very early behavioral psychologist who got into the world of economics. And back in the day, economic models were all based on the thought that humans were rational. And what he proved is that they basically weren't. They was like most humans are walking around in what he called System 1 thinking mode, which meant that they were almost always making irrational decisions because they were taking their very tough decisions, their very tough situations or their fearful situations, and they were trying to solve them by just making fast decisions that were easy, that were typically based on biases and stereotypes. And it kind of happened when they were in a mob or in a herd, and it often happened when they were uncomfortable or when they were fearful. Just this System 1 thinking. And if you step back sometimes, you realize that if you're upset or if you're mad, you'll actually be looking for and grabbing big stereotypes and making pretty big decisions based on uninformed data. That makes sense a little bit. So that's System 1 thinking.
Yep.
And then System 2 thinking is actually when we recognize we try to get rid of the emotion, try to get rid of the fear, and we try to make rational decisions. And it's very hard and it's slow. We have to get the facts in order. We have to understand what the real realities are. And it typically happens in groups and in meetings when there's high levels of trust and an absence of fear. So we're trying to get rid of fear, and we're trying to raise this System 2 thinking by having folks aligned to the 7 questions. This next model kind of brings it all together. I'm brain cramping on the great author's name now, but he has this thing he calls the ladder. So the ladder from down at the bottom is hatred and goes up to up in the world of trust and joy and love, and that's where everything is created. That's when we're in approach mode, as opposed to down in the bottom when we're fearful. We're like in attack and react mode. When we're being scarfed and we're fearful, we're in System 1 thinking, and we're like in attack and react mode, as opposed to being comfortable. We're up in System 2 thinking, we're in create and approach mode. And it's an amazing feeling, and you can see it in a team, you can see it in a group when they are unfearful, the kind of thinking that happens. Cool?
Yep.
So basically, disengagement and fear, we can destroy it with yes to the 7 questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's flip
Or
here
to your other point, to self-select, right? I mean,
right,
even if you can, yeah, I mean, even if you can get past that, there's still kind of that core thing, and you get to in the next couple of slides here, whether or not the belong and believe thing first and foremost, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you got to get yes to all of these things. So here we go. I'm going to run through this next piece fairly quickly, but remember, it's 1 focus down 2 tracks. First, alignment to what yes looks like from leadership, and second is auditing your organizational operating system to see if it can actually help the individuals in your company align to these yeses. And so the next slide in is a pretty important one. All these graphics are out of the book. That's why they're kind of, not really beautiful, but they should be pretty straightforward. This is an effort. I'm trying to describe the amount of effort, where on the left is the effort the organization has to make and continue to make. And on the right is the amount of effort that the individual has to make as you go through time. So going from the top, belonging, which I'll describe in just a second, it is always on the organization to make sure that they are keeping the promises. We're saying this is who we're going to surround you with, and the organization has to be working hard to maintain that promise, around the 80% range. There's no numbers on this. I'm just trying to put some sort of round numbers, but an individual has to approach and continue to say, yes, I belong, but they aren't really the keepers of that promise. They're just alignment to it. And it goes down into believe, and I'll describe this in a second. And as we go down this path, you start getting to accountable. And what am I accountable for? Well, the organization is saying, we're going to help you with it this far, but the individual has to step in. Then you get into measured. An individual needs to step in more. And then when you start getting into the world of heard, you see that, the organization can only say, this is the way we listen and this is how you're heard. And it's up to the individual to really step in and across that line. You get to develop. The organization can't force you to develop. They can only say, this is the way we're offering opportunities for you to develop. And the individual has to take the lead there. Same thing with balance is, we can't read your mind. We don't know what's going on in your world. We're going to give you opportunities to talk to us, but really it's up to the individual to step in. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. So it's obviously a big chunk of this is on the individual, right?
Yep. Something we're doing for them as opposed to something we're doing to them. This next slide is just kind of give you a reference of when you start seeing the slides behind it, how it's kind of organized. And this is from the book. So let's just jump right in here to the belong slide. Let's understand what I mean by belong in this world. So we're asking the individual to be able to say, yes, I fit our organization's core values and I have the skill sets needed for the job. I belong. So very specifically, core values. On this other side from the organization, we have clearly defined our core values and the skills necessary for every position. This slide and believe is that the belong is really about core values. I'm going to hit the skills for the job in just a minute. But Patrick Lencioni talks about
this is a ton of work right here, right? This is foundational, and it's kind of where you started us, kind of along our path. Is a lot of time and effort focused on this piece, because if you don't have this, the rest of it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and the core values cannot be specious. They can't be pretend, because, if you're leading somebody, I have this model I call the 4 A's. These core values, somebody's going to look and say, are you really aligned to them? Are you accountable to them? Are you truly authentic and you're aware around them? And if there's any of those A's that you're not hitting, somebody you're trying to lead or manage will absolutely just bolt. They'll just call bull on you. Patrick Lencioni, in an article about core values, he says, an organization considering a core value initiative must first come to grips with the fact that when properly implemented, core values inflict pain. They hold leadership to a higher standard, and they make some folks in the organization feel like outcasts. And that's the hard work you guys have gone through. Is this is a promise you're making. I'm going to surround you with people who have these core values every day. And that's the dream you had when you started your company too, Eric, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
Let's get back to that basic. So doing the hard work of figuring out exactly what those core values are is belong. Cool. Going on to believe. Here we go. Believe. The individual must say, I'm motivated by our organization's why, the whole Simon Sinek thing, and the strategic direction leadership is taking. I believe in what and why we're doing what we're doing. I believe in the strategy we're following. From an organizational standpoint, very important for the organization to understand exactly what their why is, understand exactly what their focus is, and have clearly laid out strategies that are consistently communicated that the individuals can align to. As you go through, strategies change like every 90 days. And as you update strategies, they need to be presented to the organization and to the individuals so they can understand how they align. One of the tools I use is this thing called the critical success factor method that kind of goes like this. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in it here, but we got to understand what our why is. Our vision has to be clear. We need to know exactly what the critical success factors are that have to be in place in order for the vision to manifest. We need to know what kind of goals we're trying to achieve, what are the strategies we're following to achieve those goals, and what tactics we're using to achieve the strategies. And individuals fall into all of these bullets and need to know where they fit, which takes us to accountability. So far, is this okay? We're going too fast or going fine here?
Nope, perfect.
Okay. Accountable, 2 sides. So from the individual side, I understand the purpose of my job or my position and what I should be thinking about and doing. I'm accountable. I understand the purpose of my job and I understand what I should be thinking about and doing. I am accountable is the awareness we're trying to give each individual. And then from the other side, the organization's got to say our accountability and responsibility structure is clear. And when you can tick this off, you're knocking off status, you're knocking off certainty, you're knocking off fairness, and you're knocking off autonomy. And I have a model I'm going to share with you here, because this is basically, we come out of belong and believe, and now everything up underneath here is kind of tied to accountability. And so if you imagine, this is my dome-shaped table metaphor example. So you're sitting around a table as a team, and this table is shaped like a dome. And out of the sky falls this issue or this opportunity, and it's shaped like a ball bearing. Give us the slide there.
Yes.
Okay. So here, this ball bearing shaped issue lands on this dome top table. What's it going to do? What's it going to do? It's going to roll. And our goal is this. So the next slide is this ball bearing or this issue can't roll off the table and drop to the floor, slipping between all of the seats and all the positions. It can't fall and get hot potatoed back and forth between two positions. It can't fall over to a seat that just takes everything that's overloaded, because all that happens when it falls into an overloaded seat is it just spills out. The goal is for it to clearly to roll into specific seats or specific jobs or specific positions. Can't drop to the crack, can't get footballed, can't fall into a seat that's overloaded. Clarity around accountability.
Yeah, and you took us through this, and I think you called it the accountability chart, and our leadership team just piled everything in our business up on a big, huge whiteboard, and I was a little surprised. Well, I was more than a little surprised. I was hugely surprised by how many of these issues or ball bearings I thought somebody had, and they thought somebody else had, or two people shared. And we uncovered a lot of that, stuff that nobody understood kind of was, they had, or things that two people were trying to, like in your example, hot potatoed back and forth. And it got, clearly those areas, as we kind of highlighted those, and you walked us through this, were pain points in our organization because we weren't getting the results that we wanted out of those issues.
Right. Yeah. Typically it's called unclear accountability.
Yes.
So dig it a little bit deeper. We understand where these seats, where the seats are and who sits in them. We get to the next model where you take it from a side view and you look down on this table from the top. It's a round table, and hanging off of it are the different jobs or positions. And we have clarity where, yes, you might own your domain and you have accountability and responsibility over that domain, but it absolutely interfaces into and overlaps to the rest of the organization. And it's super important for us to understand the way these positions or roles overlap into the whole organization. Clear? You don't operate in a vacuum.
Yep.
And so this takes us to the next model, which is really very much of a rubric that's come out. That's the once we identify what positions or roles or responsibilities have to be fulfilled in the organization, then we can actually name the role or the position. And from each role and position, we need to write a purpose statement. So imagine if everybody in your company could say, here's my job or the seat that I sit in, and these are the roles or positions that make up this job or seat. And in this position, this is the purpose of why I am filling this position. Purpose statement, like a 50-word paragraph to the max. And then we surround that purpose statement with two things. We put a long-term measure in place so that the individual can say, yes, I understand what the long-term goal of my position is, the long-term measure up top. And then down below it would be the short-term measures or the short-term activities that the individual knows they need to do as part of the role in order to fulfill the purpose that's ultimately going to align to the long-term measure. Is that clear?
Very clear.
And then every single position, as we kind of go around to the left-hand side of the model, most people sit in a position or a job and they understand who their boss is. That's sort of the normal hierarchical chart. But one of the big things that's missing, especially with somebody who comes in new to an organization, is here I am in this role or this position. Who do I turn to be coached toward this purpose, or who do I turn to be mentored? And we need to get very specific as who is coaching and who's mentoring. And then from this role, we need to understand what teams are you part of and what meetings you're part of. Now I'm just going in a clockwise measure. From this role, we need to understand what workflows we interface with, and what processes we follow. And also we need to understand what workflows and processes we have the authority to maintain or update. We need clarity. And you keep clocking around. We need to understand what systems and people we need to interface with and interact with. So if there is if you're a salesperson and you're involved in sales, you're probably updating Salesforce or you're updating HubSpot. There's an interface that you have to fill in order for your role to be effective. That makes sense? So these I'm going to go through here, and this model is basically going to be the foundation of the rest of the questions.
Yes.
Cool.
And for us going through this, that belong, believe, and accountable, that is, yes, the graph up here is very true because that was a ton of effort getting through these three before we could move on to some of the other things here.
Yeah, and you're still working through.
People getting stuck here. I mean, what do you see businesses that kind of jump into this and kind of give up, throw their hands up, or?
In terms of the way I go through it, it's they do the role and the position, the purpose statement, long-term, short-term measures first, and the team meetings, and then they get into the workflows and the systems as they mature. Does that answer what you're asking?
Yep.
A little bit.
I know specifically, I felt like giving up sometimes up here, but luckily we had an accountability partner in you to make sure that we got through it.
Yeah, but ultimately what happens is when you push this model out and you make the organizational promise and you say, this is what yes looks like and this is how we're maintaining it, the individual carries the load. They're the ones filling the bucket of the water wheel that keeps it turning. When you get it moving, the promise creates effort by the individuals that allows them to keep it moving, right? It's not something we're doing to them, it's something we're doing for them.
Mm-hmm.
So digging down, time-wise, 12:37, so I got to push here. Measured. We want to make sure that each individual is going to be able to say, yes, I understand and embrace how I'm measured. And this next piece is very important from the measurement of whether you've done the work from the organizational side is we have metrics for our positions, and owners, meaning position owners, use them to form strategies for success. So it's not something, they should understand why the numbers why the measures are there as they relate to their positions and their purpose statement, right? So you flip it down in this next piece here, it's just tying it all together. You know the organization's goals. Remember that a minute ago, because the part of belief was you understand the strategy and the tactics we're following, where we're trying to get to. You understand the way your purpose statement ties to the goals, and you understand the way your long-term measures and your short-term measures tie up to those goals. It can be hard work, but it's very important. Then the person feels, hey man, my status is clear, certainty about where I'm going. I can make decisions autonomously. Let's rock and roll. That's measured. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Good. Heard. Here we go again. The individual must absolutely say, understand and embrace how I'm heard. Now, remember a minute ago, this is kind of where it flips, where the organization can only say, this is the way we listen, and we would like for you to understand and embrace how you are heard. And this is where we start pulling in the entire model. On the other side, we have clear communication, meetings, mentoring to build trust, spur debate, and solve problems in a low scarf environment and high system too. And let's look at this. This is where the model kind of becomes maybe a little interesting, and I hope you scratch your head or have a couple little hums. So we're in the position. We understand what our purpose is. We start going around clockwise down to being heard. This is all heard. We know who we're mentored by and coached by. That's part of being heard. We know what teams and meetings we're involved in terms of being heard. This is the next one that blows people's minds. We understand the workflows and the processes we're following to achieve this purpose statement. And the reason why workflows is so important to understand and what your processes are is in a workflow, there are typically times when you need to communicate, when you need to be heard. And if we don't have the workflows well laid out, then the times that we stop and slow down and think aren't clear. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Very much.
A little bit in terms of that. And then you jump up into this top where it's interfacing. If you need to be, you've done something and you need to put it into the system, or you need to update an Excel spreadsheet, or you need to do something that signals some kind of activity or some kind of awareness, that is a huge part of being heard in today's world. You've got to put in your data so that you actually have a voice in the overall system. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm. Very.
It blows a lot of people's minds because you don't see that. I have my clients go through and take a full inventory of all their workflows and a full inventory of all their systems they're interfacing with. Slack, WhatsApp, all those things are interface systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, how you're being heard with regards to who you report to from your job. That's important. Then out to the right is something that we install. EOS calls it a quarterly conversation, a 5x5x5. I refer to it as every 90 days we sit down with the individual and basically go through and have a quick discussion about what yes looks like to the 7 questions. I just call it the 7 question seasonal meeting.
And this is on them, right? They're going to do most of that work there.
Yeah, they're going to do most of that work. It's not something we're putting on the manager or their mentor. It's like they're coming and they're doing the work and they're pushing for the time to have with, how they're being heard.
Yeah, this isn't a review meeting, right? No,
it's not. It's not a performance review or anything like that. It is 2 lives working on one meeting where it really is all about the individual. Where am I going? I want to maintain my alignment. Developed is fairly simple. It kind of follows the exact same model, but understand and embrace how I'm developed. And the organization just has to say, yes, we have a system that helps team members take charge of the development. And the real thing is a lot of people think development is like training on a new program or training on that. Well, training is a part of it. It's what I call the normal development stuff on the next page, Eric. But basically, development is anchored in clarity around what you're accountable for. The clarity around this, I call this model the octahedron. It has 8 sides. Sorry, it's kind of nerdy. But if you're super clear on what your purpose is and how you're measured long-term and short-term, how you're being mentored, how your teams are helping you develop, how you have impact into your workflows and system you interact with and who you report to, that is just the absolute backbone for development. Worst thing in the world is being involved in an organization where you don't feel like you have anybody listening to you, how you get through issues that are holding you back from you fulfilling your purpose statement, which would be your mentor and your team. If you don't have a say in terms of developing and moving forward from the roles that you play, then you're basically stuck, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it is, we have to have training, which is normal stuff, but the training part is a very small part, maybe 20%. Clarity around development comes from clarity around the 8 answers around a role or a position. Fun so far?
Yep.
And then balance, very important here. It takes us, this is where we come off of the octahedron model, but here we are in the individual. We absolutely want the individual to say, understand and embrace how balance is maintained. And from the organization standpoint, we have to do the gut check and say, have we really considered everyone's time and life capacity for work? And is it clearly presented and systematic on how we go about doing that? And so you go to this next balance piece, and the balance model kind of falls like this. Most people think balance, yes, it's work and it's life, but it's also money. And we have to have a way to constantly stay in touch with our folks of, do you have life balance? Do you have work balance? And do you have money balance? And typically that is done very informally, but sometimes more formally through the 7 questions seasonal meeting. We're asking them, do you understand that you belong and that you believe? It's clear what you're accountable for and how you're measured and heard and developed. And, are you balanced? So sometimes we'll have the hard question there, can you live on what you're making? Yes or no, because if they
it's more than just the number of hours you're working a week, right?
Right. Yeah. Can you live on what you're making? Because it's very important. If they can't, then they're actually being scarfed, and they can't live in it. And it's just, sometimes you have to have that hard discussion around, well, this is what this position pays. This is where we see you're going to be for a while. Can you be here? Yes or no? And you're just giving them the opening, not in a harsh or a mean way, but you're just being honest with them. In order for them to answer yes to the 7 questions, they got to say, yes, I'm balanced with regards to what my compensation is.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of wrapping it up, Do you feel like you're equipped to do these two things? Do the challenge of asking whether you guys have done the hard work from a leadership standpoint to say yes? And then can you audit your operating system? Because when you can make your promise, and you're going to become what I call a patient organization. Have you seen this seal yet, Eric?
I have not.
Yeah, all of my clients are coming along here and being certified as great workplaces. 7 promise organizations. So kind of this is, I guess we could say it's over now, but I just look at a lot of these great places to work, and they're more like beauty pageants and PR shows than real things. So we're going in and actually clients sign up and they get audited down the path of how they attained, and they're auditing their organizational operating system of whether it's maintained, and then every 90 days they're doing a 7-question survey, and they need to have a plan in place that they can share with their organizations. This is how we're maintaining yes to 7 questions.
Yeah. So new prospective employees, it works for them also, right? Because then, they can kind of grasp hold of this, and they're deciding for themselves whether or not this is someplace that you want to be involved in, that you want to work with, right? And for the company, it's making sure that the prospective employees understand up front what they're getting ready to get engaged in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You go through.
And you're right. I think
makes sense.
These best places to work things that you typically see is who can have the best after party, or who has the biggest foosball table in the office. And I think there's a whole heck of a lot more, back to circle back around to your point, from these quote unquote millennials, and what it takes to be engaged, right?
Right. And it's just not millennials, it's everybody. When we started sharing the 7 questions, they were like, well, that's not just what millennials want, that's what everyone wants.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And so I'm done. That's my presentation. You got any questions or anything?
Yes. Okay. So a couple here. And this is a question that I had when we did the run through. Talk about the patient organization and where it fits with respect to operating systems. I'm assuming it has to sit on top of an operating system but any of them, right? I mean, this is not an extension of traction. It could be used anywhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the patient organization, I would call it organizational operating system agnostic. So, the type of sort of name branded organizational operating systems out there nowadays, EOS and traction, holacracy, scaling up, Rockefeller habit, 40X, kind of, some people even call it OKRs, their organizational operating system, but that's just not everything. But and a lot of companies have already come along and they have a lot of this stuff in place, Eric. So I run up against clients that are maybe a little bit more sophisticated and have done this work, and we go in and you do basically an audit against the 7 questions to say, what tools or what processes do we currently follow that's answering yes. So, sometimes you don't have to come in and put in a whole new operating system, but every company has to have an operating system, whether it's named an operating system or not. So that's the idea of why an operating system works, is giving the ability to align to and maintain yes to these 7 questions.
Okay. Yep, I think it does. So another question, and this is something that I think I'm still thinking through and trying to put my hands on, and it's around the quarterly conversations. The question is, how do you prevent it from turning into a money conversation versus a review? So I guess if you're going
or even
a
balance,
how do you where do you separate that out, or where does the review and the raise thing happen?
Yeah, probably. So I didn't mean to spend so much time kind of nailing down the balance as part of it being money, but that's where money falls into the model. We want to be very specific that this is not a review and not a performance review. Some companies will still do like a once a year performance review. Most of my clients throw that out the window. And then there is in place, typically it's once a year where people are doing like salary and compensation reviews, and it is outside and separate from this 7 questions quarterly conversations. There's 2 lives working on one, the mentor or coach or leader with the individual working on that life through the 7 questions.
Got it. Got it. All right, cool. All right, any other questions out there? I think I've got them all. Let me take a quick look here. Yep, I think I have all the questions answered. All right, cool. So Walt, first, thanks again a ton. I really appreciate you coming on. And to the folks who are out there, I'll extend this. If you are interested in getting a copy of Walt's book, just shoot me an email and I'll send you a copy. I enjoyed it. I think you will. And it's awesome to have somebody like this right here in our community who can help us all improve our businesses. So Walt, thanks again. And
thanks, Eric.
Again, appreciate you coming on.
Hey, man, thanks a lot for letting me share the message.
Thank you,
Enjoy, guys. Make it happen. All right, thanks. Bye.